They said a king who'd already buried one mate could never love again. They were wrong. In the frozen halls of Shadowpine Keep, King Caelric has spent 3 years building walls around his heart, until Lianhua, a fierce Chinese healer dragged from her homeland, refuses to let him hide. She doesn't see a broken king. She sees a coward. And when she dares him to choose between fear and love, the entire north erupts in blood and fire. This is the story of a woman who challenged death itself, and a king who learned that the most dangerous battle isn't fought with claws, it's fought with the heart. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And don't forget to hit that like button. Now, let's begin. The North Tower smelled like iron and ice. Caelric stood at the narrow window, one hand pressed flat against the stone wall, the other hanging loose at his side. Outside, snow fell in thick, silent curtains, burying the courtyard below in white. The cold didn't bother him anymore. Nothing much did. 3 years. 3 years since Alara had died in his arms, her blood soaking into the floor of their chamber. Her last breath, a whisper he still heard in his sleep. 3 years since he'd stopped being a man and became a ghost wearing a crown. Behind him, the door creaked open. "Your Majesty." Caelric didn't turn. He recognized the voice, Garen, his chief advisor, a good man, loyal, but also persistent in ways that grated on Caelric's already frayed nerves. "What is it?" "The healer has arrived." Caelric's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for a healer. The council did." "Then the council can send her back." Garen stepped further into the room, his boots scuffing against the stone. "She's traveled a long way, from the east. They say she's different." "Different." Caelric turned his head slightly, just enough to catch Garen in his peripheral vision. "Different how?" "She's not from here. Not from any pack we know. She's human, or was, before she was turned. And she doesn't seem inclined to follow orders." Caelric almost laughed. Almost. "Then she'll fit right in with the rest of this damned place." Garen hesitated. "Will you see her?" "No." "The council can go to hell." Caelric's voice was flat, final. "I don't need a healer. I don't need anything." Garen stood there for a moment longer, as if weighing whether to push further. He must have thought better of it, because he turned and left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. Caelric exhaled slowly, his breath misting in the cold air. He didn't need a healer. What he needed was for everyone to stop pretending he was going to recover. Stop pretending he was going to move on. Stop pretending there was anything left inside him worth saving. But the council had other ideas. They always did. Lianhua stood in the center of the great hall, her travel cloak still dusted with snow, her boots leaving wet prints on the polished floor. Around her the walls rose high and gray, lined with tapestries that depicted battles she didn't recognize and gods she'd never worshipped. The air smelled like smoke and wet fur. She hated it already. "Miss Lianhua." She turned to see a tall man approaching, graying hair, sharp eyes, dressed in the dark green colors of the royal house. He looked tired. "I'm Garen," he said, inclining his head, "chief advisor to King Caelric. Welcome to Shadowpine Keep." Lianhua didn't bow. She didn't smile. "I didn't come here to be welcomed. I came because I was told there was work." Garen's expression flickered, surprise maybe, or approval. It was hard to tell. "There is, though I should warn you, the king is resistant to assistance." "Resistant how?" "He refuses to see anyone, healers, physicians, even his own pack members. He's been isolated in the North Tower for months." Lianhua raised an eyebrow. "And you think I'll have better luck?" "I think you're different enough that he won't know what to do with you." She studied him for a moment, this tired man with his careful words and his cautious hope. "You're afraid of him." Garen stiffened. "I respect him." "That's not what I said." A long silence stretched between them. Then Garen sighed. "He's not the man he was. Grief has changed him." "Grief changes everyone," Lianhua said quietly. "The question is whether he's strong enough to survive it." Garen's gaze sharpened. "And if he's not, then I'll tell him that too." They didn't let her see him that first day, or the second. By the third day, Lianhua was done waiting. She found the North Tower easily enough. It wasn't hard to spot, rising like a blade from the eastern wing of the keep. The guards at the base of the stairs looked at her like she'd lost her mind when she told them she was going up. "The king doesn't take visitors," one of them said. "Good thing I'm not visiting." Lianhua brushed past him and started climbing. "Wait, hey!" She didn't stop. Behind her, she heard the guards arguing in low, urgent voices, but no one followed her up the stairs. Either they were too afraid of Kaelric's wrath, or they were curious enough to see what would happen. Probably both. The stairwell was narrow and dark, lit only by the occasional torch flickering in its sconce. The air grew colder the higher she climbed, until her breath came out in clouds and frost clung to the walls. By the time she reached the top, her legs were burning and her fingers were numb. The door at the top was heavy, iron-banded, and ancient. She didn't bother knocking. She shoved it open and stepped inside. The room was a study in contradictions, sparse but not empty, cold but not lifeless. A single bed stood against one wall, the blankets rumpled and unmade. A desk sat beneath the window, covered in maps and reports that looked like they hadn't been touched in weeks. And in the center of it all, standing with his back to her, was the king. He was taller than she'd expected, broader. His dark hair was longer than it should have been, falling past his shoulders in uneven waves. He wore no crown, no ceremonial robes, just a plain shirt and trousers that had seen better days. But even like this, even standing perfectly still, there was something about him that made the air feel heavier. Power, maybe. Or pain. "I told Garen I didn't want a healer," he said, without turning around. His voice was low, rough, like he didn't use it much anymore. "Good," Lianhua said, "because I'm not here to heal you." That got his attention. He turned slowly, and for the first time she saw his face. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. Eyes the color of winter storms, pale gray, almost silver, and completely unreadable. He was handsome, she supposed, in the way that broken things sometimes were, but what struck her most wasn't his appearance. It was the emptiness. He looked at her like she was a problem he didn't have the energy to solve. "Then why are you here?" he asked. "Because your council paid me." Lianhua folded her arms. "And because I was told you needed help." "I don't." "You do. You just don't want it." His eyes narrowed. "You don't know anything about me. I know you've been hiding in this tower for 3 years. I know you've stopped ruling, stopped living, stopped everything except breathing. And I know that everyone around you is too afraid to tell you the truth." Kaelric took a step toward her, and Lianhua felt the shift in the air, the weight of his presence, the edge of danger that clung to him like a second skin. Most people would have stepped back. She didn't. "And what truth is that?" he asked softly. Lianhua met his gaze without flinching. "That you're not grieving. You're hiding." For a moment she thought he might throw her out. Or worse. His expression went stone still, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. But then something flickered in his eyes, something raw and wounded and furious, and she knew she'd hit the mark. "Get out," he said. "No." "I said get out." And I said no. Lianhua took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of pine and smoke that clung to him. "You can order me around all you want, Your Majesty, but I didn't come here to take orders. I came here to do a job. So either you work with me, or you explain to your council why you're throwing away the one person who's willing to tell you the truth." Kaelric stared at her. Really stared, like he was trying to figure out what the hell kind of creature she was. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. A short, bitter sound that held no humor at all. "You have no idea what you're walking into," he said. "Then explain it to me." "Why? So you can fix me? Save me?" He shook his head. "I don't need saving. I need to be left alone." "You need to stop being a coward." The words hung in the air like a blade. Kaelric's eyes flashed, bright, dangerous, wolf gold for just an instant, and Lianhua felt the bond snap into place. It hit her like a lightning strike. One moment she was standing there, defiant and angry, and the next she was drowning in sensation, his rage, his pain, his loneliness crashing into her chest like a tidal wave. She gasped, stumbling back a step, her hand flying to her sternum. "No, No, no, no! Calric's expression shifted from anger to shock to something that looked almost like horror. He felt it too. Of course he did. You... His voice was barely a whisper. Lianhua forced herself to breathe, forced herself to stand upright. Don't! You're... I said don't! She pressed her hand harder against her chest as if she could shove the bond back down, bury it where it couldn't touch her. This doesn't change anything. But they both knew that was a lie. She left the tower. She didn't run. Running would have been admitting defeat. But she moved quickly, her footsteps echoing in the stairwell as she descended. By the time she reached the bottom, her heart was pounding and her hands were shaking. A mate bond. She was bound to a man who was half dead inside. A king who'd already loved and lost and had no intention of doing either again. Perfect. Just perfect. Garen was waiting for her in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. How did it go? Lianhua brushed past him. He's worse than you said. Did he throw you out? Not exactly. Garen fell into step beside her. What does that mean? Lianhua stopped walking and turned to face him. It means I'm staying, whether he likes it or not. Over the next few days, Lianhua established a routine. Every morning, she brought food to the North Tower. Every morning, Calric refused to eat it. Every evening, she returned to collect the untouched tray and bring a new one. The guards stopped trying to stop her. The servants stopped whispering when she passed. And Calric stopped acknowledging her existence, which was fine. She didn't need his acknowledgement. What she needed was leverage. She found it in the infirmary. The keep's healer, a gruff older woman named Marin, had a backlog of patients that stretched back weeks. Injuries from training accidents, illnesses from the harsh winter, infections that had been left untreated for too long. Lianhua threw herself into the work, moving from bed to bed with the efficiency that surprised even Marin. You've done this before, Marin said one afternoon, watching as Lianhua stitched up a nasty gash on a young soldier's arm. I've done a lot of things before, Lianhua replied without looking up. Where did you train? Nowhere official. She tied off the last stitch and reached for a clean bandage. I learned by doing, Marin snorted. Best way to learn if you ask me. Within a week, word had spread. The new healer was good, really good. People started seeking her out specifically, asking for her by name. And slowly, quietly, Lianhua began to build something she hadn't had since she'd been taken from her home. A purpose. But every night, when she climbed those stairs to the North Tower, she was reminded that her real work was still waiting. It was on the 8th night that Calric finally spoke to her again. She'd just set down the dinner tray, roasted meat, bread, vegetables that would go uneaten, when his voice cut through the silence. Why are you doing this? Lianhua turned. He was sitting at the desk, his back to her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Doing what? She asked. This. All of this, bringing food, staying. You could have left by now. I could have, she agreed, but I didn't. Why? Lianhua considered the question. She could tell him the truth, that the bond made it almost physically painful to be away from him for too long. That every time she left the tower, something in her chest twisted and ached until she came back. But admitting that felt like giving him power she wasn't ready to hand over. So instead she said, because someone has to. Calric turned in his chair, and this time he looked at her directly. I didn't ask for this. For you. I know. Then why? Because you're dying. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Not physically, not yet, but you're dying all the same, and everyone around you is too afraid to say it. His expression hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Lianhua took a step forward. You've locked yourself in this tower. You've stopped leading, stopped living. You're so busy mourning what you lost that you can't see what's right in front of you. And what's that? A second chance. Calric stood, and the movement was so sudden, so forceful, that Lianhua instinctively took a step back. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just inches away from her, and the bond flared between them, bright and hot, and impossible to ignore. I don't want a second chance, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I don't want this bond. And I sure as hell don't want you. The words hit like a physical blow. Lianhua felt them land in her chest, sharp and brutal, and for a moment she couldn't breathe, but she didn't look away. Good, she said quietly, because I don't want you either. It was a lie. They both knew it. The bond thrummed between them, alive and undeniable, pulling them together even as they stood there pretending to push each other away. Calric's jaw tightened. Then leave. No, I'm not going to change my mind. I don't need you to. Lianhua held his gaze, refusing to flinch. But I'm not going anywhere, so you'd better get used to it. For a long moment they stood there, locked in a battle of wills that neither could win. Then Calric turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. Get out, he said again. This time Lianhua didn't argue. She turned and walked to the door, her footsteps steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. But before she left, she paused. You think pushing me away will keep me safe, she said softly. But all you're doing is proving you're exactly what I said you were. And what's that? Lianhua looked back at him, at this broken king standing alone in his tower, and felt something crack open inside her. A coward. The attack came on the 10th night. Lianhua woke to the sound of screaming. She bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding, her instincts already screaming danger. Outside her window, the courtyard was chaos. Wolves running, people shouting, the clash of steel against steel echoing through the night. Rogues. She threw on her clothes and grabbed the knife she kept under her pillow. A small blade, nothing fancy, but sharp enough to do damage if she needed it. Then she ran. The hallways were pandemonium. Servants fled in all directions. Guards rushed toward the sounds of fighting, and somewhere in the distance, a bell was ringing, loud, urgent, relentless. Lianhua fought her way through the crowd, her mind racing. The infirmary. She needed to get to the infirmary. There would be wounded soon, and Marin couldn't handle them all alone. But as she rounded the corner, she felt it, a pull, sharp and insistent, dragging her in the opposite direction. The bond. No, not now. But the pull didn't stop. It grew stronger, more urgent, and Lianhua realized with a sinking feeling that Calric was in danger. She changed direction. The North Tower stairs were empty, everyone else too focused on the battle below to worry about a king who'd locked himself away. Lianhua took them two at a time, her lungs burning, her legs screaming in protest. She burst through the door at the top just in time to see Calric slam a rogue wolf into the wall. The rogue was huge, bigger than any wolf she'd seen, with matted black fur and eyes that glowed red in the dim light. It snarled and lunged, claws extended, but Calric moved faster. He shifted mid-step, his human form dissolving into something massive and silver, and met the rogue head-on. The fight was brutal, fast, vicious, teeth and claws and blood spraying across the stone floor. Lianhua pressed herself against the wall, her knife clutched in one hand, her heart in her throat, and then it was over. Calric's jaws closed around the rogue's throat, and the creature went limp. He held it there for a moment, making sure it was dead, before dropping it and shifting back to human form. He was bleeding. A long gash ran down his side, and smaller cuts covered his arms and chest. But he was alive. Lianhua stepped forward. You're hurt. Calric looked at her, his eyes still glowing faintly gold, his chest heaving. What the hell are you doing here? Saving your life, apparently. I didn't need— Don't! Lianhua crossed the room and grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the bed. Sit. Now. To her surprise, he obeyed. She worked quickly, cleaning the wounds with water from the pitcher on the desk and tearing strips from the bedsheet to use as bandages. Her hands were steady, her movements precise, even though inside she was shaking. They're targeting you, she said as she wrapped a bandage around his ribs. This wasn't random. I know. Do you know why? Calric's jaw tightened. Because I'm weak, because I've been hiding up here like a coward, Lianhua finished for him. He looked at her, something dark and painful flashing in his eyes. Yeah. She tied off the bandage and sat back, studying him. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Yes, you do. Lianhua reached out and grabbed his chin, forcing him to meet her gaze. You know exactly what you need to do. You're just too afraid to do it. I can't. Can't what? Lead? Fight? Love. She let go of him and stood, her frustration boiling over. You've spent 3 years punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault, and now people are dying because you won't let go. Kalric stood too, towering over her, his eyes blazing. You think I don't know that? You think I don't feel every single death, every failure, every— Then do something, Lianhua shouted. Stop hiding. Stop running. Stop being so terrified of losing someone that you forget how to live. The bond flared between them, so bright and hot it almost hurt. Kalric grabbed her shoulders, pulling her close, and for a moment she thought he was going to kiss her. But he didn't. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers and closed his eyes. I'm afraid, he whispered. Lianhua's breath caught. I know. If I let you in, if I let myself feel this, and I lose you, you'll survive. She reached up and cupped his face, her thumb brushing over the sharp line of his cheekbone. Just like you survived before. But this time, you won't be alone. Kalric opened his eyes, and for the first time she saw something other than emptiness there. Hope. Fragile. Terrified. But real. I don't know if I can do this, he said. Then let me help you. For a long moment, they stood there, the bond humming between them, the sounds of battle echoing in the distance. And then, slowly, Kalric nodded. Okay. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. But it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The dawn came cold and red. Lianhua stood in the courtyard, her boots crunching through blood-stained snow, and counted bodies. 15 dead. 23 wounded. And those were just the numbers they knew about. More would turn up as the day wore on, buried under debris or frozen in the places they'd fallen. Marin worked beside her, her face gray with exhaustion, her hands moving with mechanical precision as she assessed each injury. They'd been at it for hours, stitching, bandaging, trying to save whoever could be saved. The infirmary was full. They'd turned the great hall into a makeshift hospital, laying the wounded out on tables and benches anywhere they could find space. This one's not going to make it, Marin said quietly, nodding toward a young woman whose breathing had gone shallow and rattling. Lianhua crouched beside her, checking the wound in her side. Deep. Too deep. The bleeding had slowed, but that wasn't a good sign. It meant there wasn't much blood left to lose. Get her something for the pain, Lianhua said. Marin didn't argue. She just nodded and moved away. Lianhua stayed there for a moment, holding the woman's hand, feeling the weak flutter of her pulse. She was barely 20, maybe younger. Her whole life should have been ahead of her. Instead, she'd died because a pack of rogues had decided to make a statement. The woman's eyes opened, unfocused and distant. Did we win? Lianhua squeezed her hand. Yeah, we won. It wasn't entirely true. They'd driven the rogues back, but at a cost that felt too high to call a victory. Still, the woman smiled, just a little, and closed her eyes again. She was gone before Marin came back with the medicine. Lianhua stood slowly, her knees aching, her back stiff from hours of bending over the injured. Around her, the courtyard was starting to come alive again. People moved through the snow, clearing debris, carrying away the dead, trying to piece together what was left of their home. And standing at the edge of it all, watching with those cold gray eyes, was Kalric. He'd changed since last night, not physically. He still wore the same clothes, still had the same bandages wrapped around his ribs. But something in the way he held himself was different, straighter, steadier, like he'd remembered what it felt like to carry weight instead of just letting it crush him. He caught her looking and started walking over. How many? He asked when he reached her. 15 dead, more wounded than we can handle. Lianhua wiped her hands on her already stained apron. We need more supplies, more healers, more everything. Kalric nodded slowly, his gaze moving over the courtyard. Garen's already sent word to the southern packs. They'll send what they can. Will it be enough? No. His voice was flat, honest. But it's what we have. Lianhua studied him, this man who'd spent 3 years hiding and was now standing in the wreckage of his kingdom trying to figure out how to fix it. You should be resting. So should you. I asked first. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough that it caught her off guard. I'm fine. You're bleeding through your bandages. Calric glanced down at his side where a dark stain was spreading across the white cloth. It's not that bad. It will be if you don't take care of it. Lianhua grabbed his arm, her grip firm. Come on. I have things to... They can wait. For a moment she thought he'd argue, but then he let out a long breath and nodded. Fine. She led him back into the keep, through hallways that smelled like smoke and blood, up to a small room near the infirmary that she'd claimed as her own workspace. It wasn't much. A table, a few shelves stocked with herbs and bandages, a basin of water that she changed twice a day, but it was private, and right now that was what mattered. Sit, she said, pointing to the chair. Calric sat. Lianhua moved around behind him and started unwrapping the bandages. The wound underneath was worse than she'd thought. Not deep enough to be fatal, but wide and angry, the edges already starting to show signs of infection. You should have told me it was this bad, she said. I've had worse. That's not the point. She cleaned the wound with water and a tincture that made him hiss through his teeth. Then she applied a poultice, something her grandmother had taught her how to make, back when she'd still had a grandmother, back when she'd still had a home, and wrapped fresh bandages around his ribs. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was somewhere else. On the woman who died in the courtyard, on the 15 bodies waiting to be burned, on the fact that this was only the beginning. They'll come back, she said quietly. Calric didn't ask who she meant. I know. And next time they'll bring more. Probably. Lianhua tied off the last bandage and moved around to face him. So what are you going to do? What I should have done 3 years ago. Calric met her gaze, and there was something new in his eyes now, something hard and determined. Fight. You can't do it alone. I won't be alone. He reached out and caught her wrist, his thumb brushing over the inside of her pulse point. The bond flared between them, warm and electric. You're still here, aren't you? Lianhua's breath caught. For now. For now, he repeated, like he was testing the words. Then, quieter, is that all I get? She should have pulled away, should have put distance between them, reminded him that she wasn't here to be his second chance at love, that the bond didn't mean anything if he wasn't willing to choose it. But instead she found herself stepping closer. That depends on you, she said. Calric stood, and suddenly they were inches apart, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his skin, smell the pine and smoke that clung to him. His hand moved from her wrist to her waist, tentative, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he held on too tight. I don't know how to do this, he said. Do what? This. Any of this. His voice was rough, almost desperate. I don't know how to let someone in again, how to want something without being terrified of losing it. Lianhua reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was beating fast, erratic, like it couldn't decide whether to race or stop altogether. Then start small, she said. Stop pushing me away. Stop pretending you don't feel this. Stop being so afraid of what might happen that you forget to live in what's happening right now. Calric closed his eyes, and for a moment he just stood there, breathing hard, his forehead almost touching hers. The bond thrummed between them, alive and insistent, pulling them together with a force that felt almost physical. When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with something that looked like pain. If I do this, he said slowly, if I let myself feel this, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't leave. His hand tightened on her waist. No matter how bad it gets, no matter what happens, don't leave. Lianhua's chest ached. She wanted to make that promise, wanted to tell him that she'd stay, that she'd fight beside him, that she wouldn't run no matter how hard things got. But she'd learned a long time ago that promises were dangerous things, especially when you didn't know if you could keep them. I can't promise that, she said quietly. Calric flinched like she'd struck him. But, she continued, I can promise that I won't leave without a damn good reason, and I can promise that right now, in this moment, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. It wasn't what he wanted to hear. She could see that in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes went dark. But it was the truth. And if there was one thing Lianhua refused to do, it was lie about things that mattered. Okay, he said finally. Okay? It's not enough. He pulled her closer, so close that she could feel his heartbeat against her palm. But it's more than I had yesterday. So, okay. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft or sweet or any of the things a first kiss was supposed to be. It was desperate and raw and tasted like blood and smoke and 3 years of grief finally breaking open. Lianhua's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the bond exploded between them, bright and hot and so overwhelming that for a moment she couldn't breathe. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. That was, Kaelric started. Stupid, Lianhua finished. Reckless. A terrible idea. Yeah. We should probably talk about this. Probably. Neither of them moved. Then, from somewhere outside, a bell started ringing, sharp and urgent, the same bell that had rung during the attack. They pulled apart instantly, the moment shattering like glass. Not again, Kaelric said. But it was. They ran. The courtyard was chaos again, but this time it was different. No rogues pouring through the gates, no sounds of fighting. Just people running, shouting, pointing toward the eastern wall. Garen was already there when they arrived, his face pale. What is it? Kaelric demanded. Garen didn't answer. He just pointed. Beyond the wall, maybe half a mile out, the snow was moving. Not falling, moving, shifting and churning like something massive was passing through it. Lianhua squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, and then her blood went cold. Wolves, hundreds of them. They're not attacking, Garen said, his voice tight. They're just waiting. Waiting for what? Lianhua asked. As if in answer, a single wolf stepped forward from the pack. It was huge, bigger than any she'd seen before, with fur the color of old bones and eyes that burned red even from a distance. It didn't howl, didn't snarl. It just stood there, staring at the keep like it could see right through the walls. And then it turned and walked away, the rest of the pack following behind it like a retreating tide. What the hell was that? One of the guards whispered. Kaelric's face was stone. A message. What kind of message? The kind that says they're coming back. He turned to Garen. How long do we have? A week, maybe 2 if we're lucky. Then we use every second. Kaelric's voice was sharp, commanding, the voice of a king who'd finally remembered how to rule. Double the guard. Reinforce the gates. Send word to every pack within 100 miles. Tell them we need fighters, supplies, anything they can spare. And if they don't come, then we fight with what we have. Garen nodded and hurried off, already barking orders to the guards. Around them, people started moving, the shock wearing off, urgency taking its place. Lianhua stood beside Kaelric, watching the horizon where the wolves had disappeared. They wanted us to see them. I know. They wanted us to be afraid. I know that too. Kaelric glanced at her, and there was something fierce in his expression now. Something that hadn't been there before. But fear only works if you let it. And you're not going to let it? No. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and warm. Not anymore. The bond hummed between them, steady and sure, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Shadowpine Keep, Lianhua felt something that almost resembled hope. It didn't last long. Over the next week, the keep transformed. What had been a quiet, grieving fortress became a war camp. Fighters arrived from the southern packs. Not many, but enough to make a difference. Supplies trickled in. Weapons were sharpened, armor repaired, defenses reinforced. And through it all, Kaelric was everywhere. He trained with the soldiers in the morning, planned strategy with Garen in the afternoon, walked the walls at night to check the guard rotations. He barely slept, barely ate, but he was present in a way he hadn't been in years, and people responded to it. They looked at him differently now, not with pity or fear, but with something closer to respect. Lianhua watched it happen, watched him step back into the role he'd abandoned, and felt the bond pull tighter between them. But she also felt the distance growing. He was leading again, fighting again, but he was doing it alone. Every time she tried to talk to him, really talk to him, something came up. A meeting with Garen, a training session with the guards, a report that needed reviewing. He wasn't avoiding her, not exactly, but he wasn't letting her in either. and that terrified her more than any army of rogues. On the fifth night, she cornered him in the war room. He was standing over a map, moving wooden markers around like pieces on a game board. His face was tight with concentration, his shoulders tense. "You're doing it again," Lianhua said from the doorway. Kelrick looked up. "Doing what?" "Hiding. I'm in the middle of planning a defense. That's not hiding, that's—" "You kissed me 6 days ago," she interrupted. "And since then, you've barely looked at me." His jaw tightened. "That's not true. Isn't it?" Lianhua stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "Every time I try to talk to you, you find an excuse to leave. Every time I get close, you pull away. You said you were going to stop running, Kelrick, but that's exactly what you're doing. I'm trying to keep everyone alive. By shutting me out? By not getting distracted." The words came out sharper than he probably intended, and he immediately looked away, running a hand through his hair. "I can't, Lianhua, I can't think about this right now. About us. There's too much at stake." "There's always going to be too much at stake," she said quietly. "That's not an excuse. That's just fear wearing a different face." Kelrick's hands clenched into fists on the table. "You don't understand. Then explain it to me. I can't protect you if I'm—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "If you're what? Feeling something? Caring about someone?" Lianhua moved closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You think keeping me at arm's length is going to keep me safe? It won't. I'm already in this. I was in it the moment the bond snapped into place, and pretending otherwise is just going to get us both killed." "You don't know that." "I do. Because I've seen what happens when people fight alone. They die." She reached out and grabbed his wrist, holding tight even when he tried to pull away. "You need me, Kelrick, not just as a healer, not just as your mate, but as someone who's willing to stand beside you when everything goes to hell." He stared at her, his eyes stormy and conflicted. "What if I can't?" "Can't what?" "Can't be what you need. Can't be what this bond needs. What if I—" His voice broke just a little. "What if I fail you the way I failed her?" And there it was, the truth he'd been carrying for 3 years, the weight that had been crushing him all along. Lianhua's chest ached. She wanted to tell him that he hadn't failed Alara, that her death wasn't his fault, that he needed to let go of the guilt. But she knew words wouldn't fix this. Words never fixed anything that ran this deep. So instead, she stepped closer and pressed her forehead against his. "You didn't fail her," she said quietly. "You loved her, and she died anyway. Because sometimes that's what happens. People die. Not because we're not strong enough or fast enough or good enough, just because." Kelrick's breath hitched. "But I'm not her," Lianhua continued. "I'm not fragile. I'm not breakable. And I sure as hell don't need you to protect me from everything. What I need is for you to stop punishing yourself long enough to see what's right in front of you." "And what's that?" "A chance." She pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "A chance to be happy. A chance to love someone without being terrified of losing them. A chance to stop living in the past and start fighting for the future." For a long moment, Kelrick just looked at her. Then slowly, he lifted his hand and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I don't know if I can do this," he said. "You already are." And then he kissed her again. This time it was different. Slower. Less desperate and more deliberate, like he was choosing it instead of just falling into it. The bond flared between them, warm and bright, and Lianhua felt something inside her chest settle into place. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "If we do this," Kelrick said, "if we really do this, I need you to know that I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to pull away. I'm going to get scared. I'm going to—" "I know," Lianhua interrupted, "and I'm going to call you on it every single time. Because that's what people do when they give a damn about each other. They don't give up. They don't run. They stay and they fight and they figure it out." Kelrick's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. "You're relentless. You have no idea." He laughed, a real laugh, rough and surprised, and it was the best sound she'd heard in weeks. But the moment didn't last. From somewhere outside came the sound of shouting, followed by the sharp clang of the alarm bell. They were out the door before the third ring. The courtyard was in chaos again, but this time it wasn't an attack. It was a messenger, a young wolf who'd run himself ragged getting there, his clothes torn and bloody, his eyes wild with panic. Garen was already there, helping the messenger stand. What happened? The northern outpost, the messenger gasped. They hit it 3 hours ago. Everyone's dead. They left. They left a message. What message? The messenger pulled something from his coat and held it out with a shaking hand. It was a piece of parchment, stained with blood. Garen took it and read it, his face going pale. Then he handed it to Kael'ric. Lianhua leaned in to read over his shoulder. The message was short, written in jagged letters that looked like they'd been carved more than written. 7 days, surrender or burn. Kael'ric crumpled the parchment in his fist. How many at the outpost? 32, the messenger said. All dead. The courtyard went silent. 32 people, slaughtered in their sleep, and this was just the beginning. Kael'ric's face was stone, but Lianhua could feel the rage pouring off him through the bond, hot and violent and barely controlled. Get him to the infirmary, he said, his voice cold and flat, and gather the council. We meet in an hour. Garen nodded and led the messenger away. Lianhua stayed where she was, watching Kael'ric's profile, seeing the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands shook just slightly before he fisted them at his sides. Don't, she said quietly. Don't what? Don't shut me out again. I can feel what you're feeling. I know you're angry. I know you're scared. And I know you want to deal with it alone. She stepped in front of him, forcing him to look at her. But you don't have to. For a moment she thought he'd argue, but then he let out a long, shaky breath and pulled her into his arms. 7 days, he said into her hair. I know. That's not enough time. Then we make it enough. He held her tighter, and through the bond she felt it, the fear, the rage, the desperate clawing need to protect everyone, and the terrible certainty that he couldn't. But she also felt something else, determination. We're going to win this, she said. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Lianhua pulled back and looked him in the eye. Because we're not fighting alone anymore, and that makes all the difference. Kael'ric stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a guarantee. But it was enough. For now. The council meeting lasted 3 hours and solved nothing. Lianhua sat in the corner of the war room, watching as Kael'ric and his advisors argued in circles. Surrender wasn't an option. Everyone agreed on that much. But beyond that, they couldn't agree on anything. Some wanted to fortify the keep and wait out the siege. Others wanted to strike first, take the fight to the rogues before they had a chance to organize. A few suggested evacuating the civilians, sending them south where they'd be safe. Every suggestion had a dozen problems attached to it, and nobody had any solutions. Lianhua stayed quiet, listening. She wasn't part of the council, wasn't part of the pack, not really. She was an outsider, a healer who'd stumbled into something much bigger than she'd signed up for. But the bond thrummed steadily in her chest, connecting her to the man standing at the head of the table, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she belonged here anyway. We can't defend the entire perimeter, Garen was saying, his finger tracing along the map. We don't have enough fighters. The eastern wall is the weakest point. If they hit us there, we won't hold. Then we reinforce it, one of the other advisors said. A broad-shouldered man named Torvin, who commanded the southern guard. Pull fighters from the other sections. Make it our strongest position instead of our weakest. And leave the rest of the keep vulnerable? That's suicide. Staying here at all is suicide. The argument escalated, voices rising, tempers flaring. Kael'ric stood at the center of it all, his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. He'd barely spoken since the meeting started, just listened as his council tore each other apart, trying to find an answer that didn't exist. Finally, he raised his hand, and the room went silent. Enough, he said quietly. Everyone stopped talking. Kael'ric looked around the table, his gaze moving from face to face. You're all right. Every single one of you. We don't have enough fighters. We don't have enough supplies. We don't have enough time. And no matter what we do, people are going to die. The room stayed silent, the weight of those words settling over everyone like a shroud. But, Kael'ric continued, We're not surrendering, and we're not running, so here's what we're going to do. He leaned forward, both hands flat on the table. We fortify the eastern wall like Torvin suggested. Pull half the fighters from the northern section and split them between east and south. The civilians who can't fight get moved to the inner keep. Stone walls, one entrance, easy to defend. That'll bottleneck us, Garen said carefully. It'll also keep them alive if the outer walls fall. Kelrick's voice was hard, certain. And we send scouts north. I want to know exactly where these bastards are camped, how many there are, what kind of weapons they're carrying, every detail. And if the scouts don't come back, then we know they're closer than we thought. Kelrick straightened, his jaw set. We've got 6 days left. I want every second used, no breaks, no hesitation. We prepare for war, and we do it right. Garen nodded slowly. And if they attack before we're ready? Then we fight anyway. The council dispersed after that, filing out of the room in 2s and 3s, their faces grim. Lianhua stayed where she was, watching as Kelrick stood alone at the table, staring down at the map like it might suddenly reveal some hidden answer. You did good, she said quietly. He didn't look up. I sent 32 people to that outpost, told them they'd be safe. You didn't know. I should have. His hands clenched into fists on the table. I should have seen this coming, should have been ready. Lianhua stood and crossed the room, stopping beside him. You can't predict everything. I'm the king. That's exactly what I'm supposed to do. You're not a god, Kelrick. You're just a man trying to keep his people alive. She reached out and covered one of his fists with her hand. And you're doing it. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not the way you wish you could, but you're doing it. He finally looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was so raw it made her chest ache. What if it's not enough? Then we deal with it when it happens. But right now, in this moment, you made a decision. You gave people a plan. That's more than anyone else in that room could do. Kelrick turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady, an anchor in the chaos. I don't know how you do it, he said. Do what? Stay so calm, stay so sure. He shook his head slightly. Everything's falling apart, and you just stand there like it's all going to work out. I'm not calm, Lianhua said. I'm terrified, but I learned a long time ago that falling apart doesn't help anyone, so I save it for later. Later? When this is over, when we've won or lost or whatever's going to happen has happened. She squeezed his hand. Then I'll fall apart. But not before. Something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like admiration. You're stronger than I am. No, I'm just better at hiding it. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, and Lianhua let herself lean into him, just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, the warmth of his body cutting through the cold that had settled into her bones. 6 days, he murmured into her hair. 6 days, she agreed. Think we can do it? I think we don't have a choice. He held her tighter, and through the bond she felt it. The fear, the determination, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. Then he let her go and stepped back, his expression hardening into something more like the king he needed to be. Come on, he said. We've got work to do. The next 5 days blurred together in a haze of preparation and panic. Lianhua worked in the infirmary during the day, stockpiling supplies, training anyone who could hold a needle how to stitch a wound. At night, she walked the walls with Kelrick, checking defenses, talking to the guards, making sure everyone knew what to do when the attack came. Because it wasn't if anymore. It was when. The scouts came back on the 3rd day, 2 out of 5. The other 3 were gone, and nobody needed to ask what had happened to them. The 2 who made it back brought news that made everyone's blood run cold. The rogue pack wasn't just big, it was massive. Over 300 wolves, maybe more, led by the bone-white alpha they'd seen at the wall. They were camped 5 miles north, in the ruins of an old fortress, and they were building siege equipment. Ladders, battering rams, towers that could roll right up to the walls and let dozens of wolves pour over at once. This wasn't going to be a raid. This was going to be an invasion. Kelrick took the news without flinching, but Lianhua felt the spike of fear through the bond, sharp and visceral. 300 wolves against maybe 80 fighters, half of whom were barely trained. The math didn't work. It couldn't work. But Kaelric didn't let anyone see his fear. He just nodded, thanked the scouts, and doubled the work shifts. On the fourth day, the first civilians started arriving from the outer villages. Families who'd heard about the northern outpost, who knew what was coming and wanted to be behind stone walls when it hit. Kaelric let them in, all of them, even though it stretched their supplies even thinner. "We don't turn people away," he said when Garen tried to argue. "Not now. Not ever." The keep swelled with refugees. The great hall became a camp, people sleeping on the floor, sharing blankets, cooking over communal fires. It was crowded and chaotic and loud, but there was something almost defiant about it. Like everyone had decided that if they were going to die, they were going to die together. Lianhua spent most of her time in the infirmary, but she also found herself helping wherever she was needed, organizing food distribution, calming frightened children, teaching a group of women how to make bandages from torn sheets. She barely slept. When she did, it was in snatches, an hour here, 30 minutes there, curled up on a cot in the corner of the infirmary with her boots still on. Kaelric slept even less. She'd find him at odd hours, standing on the walls or walking through the camp, talking to people, checking on things that had already been checked 3 times. He moved like a man possessed, driven by something that wouldn't let him stop. On the 5th night, Lianhua caught him in the armory, sharpening a sword that was already sharp enough to split hairs. "You're going to wear it down to nothing," she said from the doorway. Kaelric looked up, startled. He'd been so focused he hadn't heard her approach. "Couldn't sleep." "Neither could I." She walked over and sat down on the bench beside him. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." "Want to pretend everything's fine and sharpen weapons in silence?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "That sounds better." They sat there for a while, the only sound the rhythmic scrape of stone on steel. Then Kaelric set the sword down and looked at her. "I keep thinking about tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tomorrow. The 6th day. The day before the deadline." "What about it?" Lianhua asked. "About what happens if we lose? If they break through the walls, if we can't hold them?" He stopped, his jaw working. "I keep thinking about you. About where you'll be when it happens." Lianhua's chest tightened. "I'll be wherever I'm needed. That's what I'm afraid of." Kaelric turned to face her fully. "You're a healer, Lianhua. You should be in the inner keep, somewhere safe, where you can help the wounded without putting yourself in danger. And you should be there too, but you're not going to be." She met his gaze steadily. "I know where this is going, Kaelric, and the answer is no." "You don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to ask me to stay behind, to stay safe, to let you go out there and fight while I hide." She shook her head. "And I'm telling you right now, that's not happening." His expression hardened. "This isn't a request." "Good, because I wasn't planning to follow it anyway." "Lianhua." "No." She stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to finally let me in. Finally stop pushing me away and then turn around and try to protect me like I'm some fragile thing that'll break the first time things get hard. I'm not trying to—" "Yes, you are." Her voice was sharp, cutting. "You're terrified of losing me the way you lost her, so you're trying to lock me away somewhere safe. But here's the thing, Kaelric. I didn't survive everything I've survived by hiding. I survived by fighting, and I'm not about to stop now." Kaelric stood too, towering over her, his eyes blazing. "You could die out there. So could you. That's different." "Why? Because you're the king? Because you're a man? Because you think your life matters less than mine?" She stepped closer, refusing to back down. "We're bonded, Kaelric. That means we're in this together. And if you think I'm going to stand by and watch you die while I'm safe behind stone walls, you don't know me at all." They stood there, locked in a battle of wills, the air between them crackling with tension. "I can't lose you," Kaelric said finally, his voice breaking. "I can't go through that again." "Then don't." Lianhua reached up and cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "Don't lose me. Fight beside me. Trust me to hold my own, and stop trying to protect me from the world when what I need is for you to fight with me in it." His hands came up to cover hers, his grip almost desperate. "What if I can't?" "You can." You're just afraid to try. I'm afraid of everything when it comes to you. I know. She pulled him down until their foreheads touched. But you're doing it anyway. That's what matters. For a long moment, they just stood there, breathing each other in, the bond wrapping around them like a living thing. I need you to promise me something, Calric said. What? If things go wrong tomorrow, if it looks like we're going to lose, you run. You don't stay and fight to the end. You don't try to save everyone. You run and you survive. Lianhua pulled back to look at him. Only if you promise the same thing. I can't. I'm the king, I know. She smiled, sad and tired. But you're also my mate, and I'm not making a promise I know you won't keep. Calric closed his eyes, and she felt the wave of frustration and fear and helpless love that poured through the bond. You're impossible. So are you. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her, the feel of her, everything about this moment before it slipped away. Lianhua kissed him back with everything she had, pouring every ounce of stubborn defiance and terrified hope into it. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. Tomorrow, Calric said. Tomorrow, Lianhua agreed, and there was nothing else to say. The sixth day dawned cold and clear. Lianhua stood on the eastern wall, watching the horizon, waiting for something that didn't come. No army, no siege towers, no sign of the 300 wolves that were supposed to be bearing down on them. Just silence. Where are they? One of the guards muttered. Nobody had an answer. Calric stood a few feet away, his hands braced on the parapet, his expression unreadable. He'd been there since before dawn, watching, waiting, his tension so thick Lianhua could feel it even without the bond. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, turning the snow to slush. People started to whisper, hope creeping into their voices. Maybe the rogues had changed their minds. Maybe they'd moved on. Maybe... The first horn sounded at noon. It came from the north, long and low and mournful, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Everyone on the wall froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. Then the second horn answered it, and the third, and the fourth. And then they came. Not from the north like everyone expected. From the east, pouring out of the forest in a massive wave, hundreds of wolves moving as one, their howls rising into the air like a battle cry. They flanked us, Garen said, his voice hollow with shock. Calric's expression went stone cold. Sound the alarm. Get everyone to their positions. Now! The keep erupted into chaos. Guards ran to the walls. Civilians fled to the inner keep. Fighters grabbed weapons and armor, their faces pale but determined. And Lianhua ran too, heading for the infirmary, already planning triage in her head. But she didn't make it. Halfway across the courtyard, she felt it. A spike of pain through the bond, sharp and sudden. She stumbled, her hand flying to her chest, and turned just in time to see part of the eastern wall explode inward. Not collapse, explode. Wood and stone went flying, and through the gap poured wolves, massive, snarling, their eyes burning red. The defenders tried to hold the line, but there were too many, coming too fast. Lianhua saw Calric shift mid-run, his human form dissolving into the massive silver wolf she'd seen once before. He hit the first wave like a battering ram, all teeth and claws and fury, and the bond blazed so bright it nearly blinded her. She didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed a fallen sword from the ground. Too heavy, not balanced right, but it would have to do, and threw herself into the fight. Someone shouted at her to get back, to get to safety, but she ignored them. A rogue lunged at her from the left, and she swung the sword with both hands, catching it across the shoulder. It yelped and stumbled, and she hit it again, harder, until it stopped moving. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything over the rush of blood in her ears. But she didn't stop. Another rogue, another swing, another body hitting the ground. She didn't know how long she fought. Could have been minutes or hours. Time lost all meaning in the chaos of blood and screaming and the constant, overwhelming certainty that she was going to die. But she didn't. And then, suddenly, the pressure eased. The rogues pulled back, regrouping near the broken wall, and the defenders did the same. Lianhua stood in the middle of the courtyard, gasping for breath, her borrowed sword dripping blood onto the snow. Around her, bodies lay scattered, rogues and defenders both, too many to count. Lianhua! She turned and saw Kaelric running toward her, back in human form, blood streaking his face and arms. He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes wild. Are you hurt? I'm fine. You're bleeding. She looked down. He was right. A long gash ran down her left arm, and smaller cuts covered her hands. She hadn't even felt them. It's not that bad, she said. Kaelric pulled her against him, his whole body shaking. Through the bond, she felt the terror he'd been holding back, the awful certainty that he'd lost her, that he'd turn around and find her dead in the snow. You promised, he said roughly. You promised you'd be careful. No, I didn't. She pulled back just enough to look at him. I promised I'd fight, and I did. Before he could respond, another horn sounded, this one from inside the keep. They both turned. The inner courtyard was on fire. Somehow, while everyone had been focused on the eastern wall, a second group of rogues had gotten inside. They'd set fire to the supply stores, to the stables, to anything that would burn. Smoke billowed into the sky, thick and black. And through it, Lianhua could see wolves tearing through the camp where the civilians had been sheltering. No, Kaelric breathed. And then he was running, shifting mid-stride, and Lianhua ran after him because there was nothing else she could do. The inner courtyard was hell. Wolves everywhere, civilians screaming, guards trying desperately to form a defensive line while everything around them burned. Lianhua saw a woman go down, 3 rogues on top of her, and she didn't think. She just threw herself at them, swinging the sword with everything she had. One of them turned on her, faster than she expected, and its claws caught her across the ribs. Pain exploded through her side, white-hot and blinding. She stumbled, her sword falling from her grip, and hit the ground hard. The wolf loomed over her, its jaws opening wide, and Lianhua knew with absolute certainty that this was it. This was how she died. But then something silver and massive slammed into the wolf, dragging it away from her. Kaelric. She felt him through the bond, felt his rage and terror and the single-minded focus of keeping her alive. She tried to stand, tried to help, but her side was on fire and her legs wouldn't hold her. The world tilted sideways, and she realized distantly that she was losing too much blood. Around her, the battle raged on. She could hear Kaelric fighting, could feel him through the bond. Still alive, still moving, but there were so many of them, and they just kept coming, and she couldn't. A shadow fell over her. Lianhua looked up and saw the bone-white alpha standing there, staring down at her with those burning red eyes. It didn't attack. It just watched, its head tilted slightly, like it was curious. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the smoke, and everything went dark. When Lianhua opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was stone. Gray stone ceiling, cracked in places, stained with smoke. She blinked, trying to focus, trying to remember where she was and why everything hurt so much. The infirmary. She was in the infirmary. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her side, sharp enough to make her gasp, and a hand pressed firmly against her shoulder, pushing her back down. Don't move. Marin's face swam into view, lined with exhaustion, streaked with soot and dried blood. You've got 5 broken ribs and a gash that took 37 stitches to close. You move too fast, you'll tear them open again. Lianhua's mouth was dry, her tongue thick. How long? 2 days. 2 days. She'd been unconscious for 2 days. Kaelric is alive, Marin said quickly. Injured, but alive. He's been in here every few hours checking on you. Had to physically throw him out last time because he wouldn't leave. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. The bond was there, steady and strong, and now that she was conscious enough to feel it properly, she could sense him, tired, hurting, but alive. The battle? She asked. Marin's expression went carefully blank. We held. How many? 43 dead, another 60 wounded, half of them critical. Marin's voice was flat, clinical, but Lianhua could hear the grief underneath. Could have been worse. The rogues pulled back after you went down. Lianhua frowned. Why? Nobody knows. 1 minute they were pouring through the gates, the next they just stopped, retreated back to the forest. Marin shook her head. Kaelric thinks they were testing us, seeing what we could handle. And what we can't, Lianhua said quietly. Marin didn't argue. Over the next few hours, Lianhua drifted in and out of consciousness. Every time she woke, Marin was there with water or medicine or news about the wounded. The infirmary was packed, every bed full, people lying on the floor when there wasn't room anywhere else. The air smelled like blood and smoke, and the bitter herbs Marin used to fight infection. It was late afternoon when Kaelric finally came. Lianhua heard his footsteps before she saw him, heavy, uneven, like he was favoring one leg. Then he was there, standing beside her cot, and she got her first good look at him since the battle. He looked like hell. His left arm was bandaged from shoulder to wrist. Deep cuts crossed his face and neck, some stitched, some just scabbed over. He moved stiffly, carefully, like everything hurt. But his eyes, those storm gray eyes, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her chest ache. "You're awake," he said. "So are you." "Barely." He lowered himself onto the stool beside her bed, moving like an old man. "Marin said you woke up a few hours ago. She also said you've been haunting the infirmary. I needed to make sure—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I thought I'd lost you." "You didn't. I felt you go down." His voice was rough, raw. "Felt you slip away through the bond. And I couldn't. There were too many of them. I couldn't get to you fast enough." Lianhua reached out with her good hand and caught his. "But you did get to me. Not before that thing nearly tore you apart." His grip tightened. "I should have made you stay back. Should have—" "Stop!" She squeezed his hand hard enough to make him look at her. "We're not doing this. We're not playing the what-if game. I made my choice. I fought. I survived. That's all that matters." Kaelric stared at her for a long moment. Then he let out a shaky breath and pressed his forehead against their joined hands. "I can't do this," he whispered. "Do what?" "Watch you almost die, feel you slipping away and know there's nothing I can do to stop it." He lifted his head and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been fighting for 3 years to not feel anything, to not care. And then you show up and make me feel everything, and I can't. Lianhua, I can't survive losing you." Her throat tightened. "You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. Neither do you." She shifted slightly, ignoring the pain in her side. "But I do know this. I'm still here, you're still here, and we're going to keep being here as long as we can." "That's not a plan." "It's the only plan we've got." He laughed, a broken, desperate sound, and lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You're going to drive me insane." "Probably." "I'm serious, Lianhua. I don't know how to do this. How to love someone and not be terrified every second that I'm going to lose them." "Then be terrified," she said simply. "Be scared and do it anyway. That's all any of us can do." Kaelric looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something stronger, something that looked almost like resolve. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay? I'm choosing this. Choosing you, even though it scares the hell out of me." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "But you have to promise me something." "What?" "No more throwing yourself in front of wolves that outweigh you by 100 pounds. Lianhua smiled despite the pain. "Can't promise that." "Try." "Fine. I'll try to only throw myself in front of the smaller ones." He groaned and dropped his head onto her cot. "You're impossible." "You already said that." Bears repeating. They sat there in silence for a while, just holding hands, drawing comfort from the simple fact that they were both still breathing. Around them, the infirmary hummed with quiet activity. Marin moving between patients, low conversations, the occasional groan of pain. Finally, Kaelric lifted his head. "There's something else you need to know." Lianhua's stomach tightened. "What?" "The bone-white alpha, the one leading the rogues." He hesitated. "It had you. You were on the ground, bleeding, completely defenseless, and it just walked away." "I remember." "You remember?" He straightened, staring at her. "Why didn't you say anything?" I've been unconscious for 2 days. When exactly was I supposed to mention it? Lianhua, it looked at me, she said quietly, like it was studying me, and then it left. Why? I don't know. But even as she said it, something nagged at the back of her mind. The way the alpha had tilted its head, the intelligence in those red eyes, like it had recognized something. Calric's expression darkened. I don't like this. Neither do I. The rogues haven't attacked again since they pulled back. They're just out there waiting. He rubbed his face with his free hand. Garen thinks they're regrouping, building up for another assault. What do you think? I think they're playing with us. His voice went hard, cold. They had us. Could have pushed through, could have slaughtered everyone, but they stopped. And I need to know why. Lianhua wanted to argue, to tell him it didn't matter why, that they should just be grateful for the reprieve. But she knew he was right. The rogues were planning something, and whatever it wasn't going to be good. So what's the plan? She asked. Rest, recover, get our fighters back on their feet. He squeezed her hand. And figure out what the hell these rogues want before they come back and finish what they started. Over the next 3 days, the keep slowly pulled itself back together. The fires were put out. The dead were burned with proper ceremony, their ashes scattered in the forest behind the keep. The eastern wall was reinforced with whatever materials they could scavenge, timber from collapsed buildings, stones from the ruined sections of the outer courtyard. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. Maybe. Lianhua stayed in the infirmary for the first 2 days, despite her protests. Marin wouldn't let her leave, insisting that she needed rest and that moving around too much would tear her stitches. So Lianhua did what she could from her cot, directing other healers, organizing supplies, keeping track of which patients needed what. On the 3rd day, she'd had enough. She waited until Marin was occupied with a patient on the other side of the room, then carefully swung her legs off the cot and stood. Pain radiated through her side, sharp and insistent, but manageable. She gritted her teeth and took a step, then another. By the time Marin turned around and saw her, Lianhua was halfway to the door. What do you think you're doing? Marin demanded. Walking. You're supposed to be resting. I've been resting for 3 days. Any more and I'm going to lose my mind. Lianhua paused at the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. I'll be careful. I promise. Marin looked like she wanted to argue, but then she just sighed and shook her head. If you tear those stitches, I'm not fixing them. Noted. Lianhua made her way slowly through the keep, taking breaks when the pain got too bad, keeping one hand pressed against her side like she could hold herself together through sheer willpower. People stared as she passed, some with concern, others with something that looked almost like respect. She found Calric in the war room, bent over the map again, Garen and Torvin standing on either side of him. Can't keep waiting, Torvin was saying. Every day we sit here, we're giving them time to organize. We should strike first. With what army? Garen countered. We lost almost a third of our fighters in the last attack. We strike now, we'll be slaughtered. So we just sit here and wait for them to come finish us off? We prepare. We recover. We take the fight to them, Calric said quietly. Both men stopped talking and stared at him. You can't be serious, Garen said. I'm not suggesting a full assault, but Torvin's right. We can't just wait. Calric straightened, his gaze moving between them. We need information. Need to know what they're planning, where they're vulnerable. And we need to make them understand that we're not going to roll over and die. How? Torvin asked. A small strike team, fast, quiet. Hit their camp, cause some damage, get out before they can organize a response. That's suicide, Garen said flatly. Maybe, but doing nothing is definitely death. Calric's jaw set. I'm going, and I need volunteers. I'll go, Torvin said immediately. Garen hesitated, then nodded. So will I. Count me in too. All 3 men turned to see Lianhua standing in the doorway. Calric's expression went from determined to furious in half a second. Absolutely not. You're leading a strike team into enemy territory and you think I'm going to stay behind? You can barely walk. I can walk fine. She pushed off the doorframe and took 3 steps into the room, trying not to wince. See? You're injured. So are you. Lianhua crossed her arms, ignoring the pull in her side. And you're still planning to go. That's different. Why? Because you're the king. She moved closer, lowering her voice. Or because you're still trying to protect me from the world, instead of letting me fight in it? Kelrick's hands clenched into fists on the table. Through the bond, she felt his fear spike, sharp and visceral and overwhelming. I can't watch you almost die again, he said quietly. Then don't watch. Fight beside me instead. Garen cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should discuss the details of the strike first and worry about personnel later. Good idea, Torvin said quickly, clearly eager to get out of the middle of whatever was happening between his king and the healer. But Kaelric didn't look away from Lianhua. We're not done with this conversation. Yes, we are, she said. Because I'm going, and nothing you say is going to change my mind. For a long moment, they stood there locked in a silent battle. Then Kaelric's shoulders sagged, just slightly, and he turned back to the map. Fine, he said, his voice tight. But you stay in the back. You don't engage unless there's no other choice. Deal. It wasn't, really. They both knew that when the fighting started, plans went out the window and people did what they had to do to survive. But it was enough to end the argument, at least for now. They spent the next hour planning. The rogue camp was 5 miles north in the ruins of an old fortress built into the side of a mountain. Defensible, but also predictable. There would be sentries, probably a patrol or two. The strike team would have to move fast, hit hard, and get out before the bulk of the rogue pack could respond. When do we leave? Torvin asked. Kelric looked at Lianhua, then back at the map. Tonight, under cover of darkness. The team assembled as the sun set. 10 fighters total, including Kelric, Lianhua, Garen, and Torvin. The rest were handpicked from the best of what they had left, quick, skilled, and willing to take the risk. They left through the northern gate just after full dark, moving in single file through the snow-covered forest. Kelric led, his wolf senses guiding them around obstacles, keeping them quiet. Lianhua walked near the middle of the group, her side aching with every step but her mind focused on the task ahead. The bond thrummed between her and Kelric, a constant reminder that he was there, that he was watching, that he was probably still furious with her for coming. But he hadn't tried to stop her, and that was progress. They reached the edge of the rogue camp just before midnight. It was bigger than the scouts had reported. Not just wolves, there were supply tents, weapons caches, even what looked like a command structure set up in the center of the ruins. This wasn't a temporary camp, this was a base. They're settling in, Garen whispered, planning to stay. Kelric's expression was grim. Then we make sure they don't get comfortable. He divided the team into 3 groups. Torvin would take his group and hit the weapons cache on the east side. Garen would take his people to the supply tents on the west. And Kelric would lead the 3rd group, including Lianhua, straight through the middle to the command structure. We go in fast, cause as much damage as we can, and get out, Kelric said. If you get separated, head back to the rendezvous point and wait. Don't try to be a hero. Everyone nodded. On my signal, Kelric said. They waited, crouched in the darkness, watching the rogue sentries pace their routes. Lianhua's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Her palms were sweating despite the cold, her grip tight on the knife Marin had given her before they left. Then Kelric raised his hand and dropped it. They moved. Lianhua had never been part of a coordinated strike before, and the efficiency of it was almost beautiful. Torvin's group hit the weapons cache first, setting fire to the wooden supports and sending the whole structure collapsing inward. The explosion of noise drew the sentries away from the center, and Garen's group used the distraction to torch the supply tents. By the time the rogues figured out what was happening, Kelric's group was already inside the command structure. It was surprisingly well organized, maps on the walls, supply logs on a makeshift table, even correspondence between the rogue alpha and what looked like other packs. Kelric grabbed everything he could carry, shoving papers into a pack while the others stood guard. "We've got company," one of the fighters hissed. Lianhua turned and saw wolves pouring out of the surrounding tents, dozens of them, their eyes glowing in the firelight. Too many. Way too many. Time to go, Kelric said, slinging the pack over his shoulder. They ran, The forest was chaos, wolves chasing them, fighters peeling off to hold the line, the sounds of combat echoing through the trees. Lianhua ran as fast as she could, her side screaming in protest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A wolf lunged at her from the left. She ducked, slashed with her knife, felt it connect. The wolf yelped and fell back, but two more took its place. Lianhua, move! Calric shouted. She ran, but she wasn't fast enough. One of the wolves caught her from behind, its weight slamming into her and sending them both crashing to the ground. Pain exploded through her injured side, white-hot and blinding, and her knife went flying. The wolf's jaws snapped inches from her face. She threw her arm up, and teeth sank into her forearm instead of her throat. She screamed, kicking wildly, trying to throw it off. Then Calric was there, in wolf form, dragging the rogue off her with a viciousness that made her stomach turn. He tore into it with teeth and claws, and the rogue didn't get up again. He shifted back to human, blood dripping from his hands, and hauled her to her feet. "Can you run?" he demanded. "Yes." "Then run." They ran together, crashing through the underbrush, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. By the time they reached the rendezvous point, Lianhua's vision was swimming, and her arm was soaked with blood. Garen was already there with his group, and Torvin arrived moments later. They'd lost 2 fighters, but the rest had made it out. "We need to move," Garen said. "They'll be tracking us." Nobody argued. The trip back to the keep was a blur. Lianhua kept moving on autopilot, one foot in front of the other, her whole body screaming in protest. Calric stayed beside her the entire time, one hand gripping her uninjured arm, steadying her when she stumbled. By the time they staggered through the gates, the sun was rising and Lianhua was barely conscious. Marin took one look at her and started cursing. "Told you," she said as she guided Lianhua back to the infirmary. "Told you not to tear the stitches." "Worth it," Lianhua mumbled. "You're an idiot." "Yeah." Marin patched her up again. New stitches in her side where the old ones had torn, bandages for the bite on her arm, something bitter to drink that dulled the pain. Through it all, Calric stood in the corner, watching with an expression that made Lianhua's chest ache. When Marin finally finished and left them alone, he crossed the room and sat on the edge of her cot. "Don't say it," Lianhua said. "Say what?" "I told you so." Calric shook his head. "I wasn't going to." "Really? Really?" He reached out and brushed a strand of hair off her forehead. "You were right. You can hold your own. You proved that tonight. But watching you go down again nearly killed me." His voice was rough, unsteady. "And I don't know how to reconcile that, how to let you fight without being terrified every second that I'm going to lose you." Lianhua caught his hand and held it against her cheek. "You figure it out the same way I do, one day at a time, one fight at a time, and you trust that we're strong enough to get through it together." Calric closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with emotion. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Lianhua's breath caught. "What?" "I love you," he said again, stronger this time. "I've been fighting it, trying to pretend it wasn't real, but I can't anymore. I love you, Lianhua, and I'm done being afraid of it." Tears burned at the back of her eyes. "You pick now to tell me this? When I look like I've been dragged through hell backwards?" "I pick now because I can't wait anymore." He leaned down until his forehead touched hers. "Because tomorrow, we might die. And I need you to know that no matter what happens, no matter how this ends, I choose you. Not because of the bond, not because fate decided we belong together, but because you're the strongest, most stubborn, most infuriating person I've ever met, and I don't want to spend another second without you." Lianhua's tears spilled over, running hot down her cheeks. "I love you too, you impossible man." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. And through the bond she felt it, the shift, the settling, the sense of 2 pieces finally clicking into place. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. "So what now?" Lianhua whispered. Calric smiled, a real smile, maybe the first genuine one she'd seen since they met. "Now we figure out what the hell those rogues are planning, and then we end this." "Together?" "Together." The documents they'd stolen from the rogue camp changed everything. Calric spread them across the war room table the next morning, his face dark as he read through them. Garen stood beside him, his expression growing grimmer with each page. Lianhua sat in a chair against the wall, her arm in a sling, watching them work through the information. "This doesn't make sense," Garen said finally. "What doesn't?" Lianhua asked. Calric looked up. "They're not just rogues. They're organized, funded, and according to this," he tapped one of the letters, "they're being backed by the Eastern Coalition." Lianhua frowned. "Who?" "A group of packs that broke away from the Northern Alliance 15 years ago," Garen explained. "They've always claimed we were too weak, too willing to negotiate instead of fight, but we thought they'd scattered after their leader died." "Apparently not." Calric's jaw tightened. "According to this, they've been rebuilding, recruiting rogues, outcasts, anyone with a grudge against the established packs. And now they're using Shadowpine as a test case." "A test case for what?" "Taking over the North." He pushed another document toward her. "They hit the outpost first to gauge our response. Then they attacked the keep to see how we'd defend, and now they're waiting to see if we'll break or if we'll fight back." Lianhua's stomach turned cold. "And if we break?" "They move on to the next territory. And the next, until they've dismantled every pack in the North and rebuilt it in their image." Calric's hands clenched into fists on the table. "We're not just fighting for Shadowpine. We're fighting for everyone." The room went silent. Finally, Garen spoke. "Then we need to end this, fast, before they can bring in reinforcements." "How?" Calric asked. "We barely survived the last attack. If they come at us with full force..." "They won't." Everyone turned to look at Lianhua. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the pull in her side. "They won't come at us with full force because they don't have to. They're waiting for us to surrender or collapse. They think we're already broken." "We are broken," Garen said quietly. "No, we're hurt. There's a difference." Lianhua moved to the table, looking down at the maps and documents. "They've been testing us, studying us, figuring out our weaknesses, but they haven't learned what we're capable of when we stop being afraid." Calric's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "That we do what they don't expect." She met his gaze. "We challenge them, one-on-one, their leader against ours." The room erupted. "That's insane," Torvin said, appearing in the doorway. "The Bone White Alpha is twice the size of any wolf I've ever seen. It'll tear Calric apart." "Maybe," Lianhua agreed. "Or maybe it's exactly what we need to do to end this without losing more people." "She's right," Calric said quietly. Everyone stared at him. "You can't be serious," Garen said. "This isn't the old days. We don't settle disputes with single combat anymore." "But they do." Calric tapped the documents. "It says it right here. The Eastern Coalition still follows the old laws. Honor combat. Trial by strength. If I challenge their alpha and win, the rest of the pack has to back down. And if you lose? Then at least everyone else survives." Calric's voice was steady, certain. "At least the civilians get to live. At least..." "No." Lianhua's voice cut through the room like a blade. "We're not doing this so you can martyr yourself." Calric turned to her. "That's not what I..." "Yes, it is." She moved around the table until she was standing right in front of him. "You've spent 3 years punishing yourself for Alara's death, and now you see a chance to die fighting and call it noble. But that's not what this is about. This is about winning, about surviving, about making sure that when this is over, we're both still standing." His expression softened. "Lianhua, if you're going to challenge the Alpha, you do it to win, not to die with honor, not to sacrifice yourself. To win." She grabbed his arm with her good hand. "Promise me." Calric stared at her for a long moment, then he nodded. "I promise." "Good." She turned to the others. "So how do we make sure he doesn't get himself killed?" They spent the rest of the day planning. The challenge would be issued at dawn the next day, giving Calric time to rest and prepare. Garen would deliver the message personally, invoking the old laws that even the Eastern Coalition couldn't refuse without losing face. The combat would take place in neutral territory, the clearing between the keep and the rogue camp, and both sides would agree to honor the outcome. It was a risk, a huge one, but it was better than waiting for the rogues to attack again with reinforcements. That night, Lianhua found Calric on the walls, staring out at the forest. Can't sleep? She asked. He glanced at her. You should be resting. So should you. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Having second thoughts? About 100 of them. He was quiet for a moment. What if I'm wrong? What if this doesn't work? Then we figure out something else. Lianhua leaned against him, careful of her injuries. But I don't think you're wrong. I think you're scared, and that's okay. I'm terrified, he admitted. Not of dying, of leaving you alone. You won't. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise that if the worst happens, I won't fall apart. I won't give up. I'll keep fighting. She looked up at him. Because that's what you taught me. That's what you've been doing this whole time, even when you didn't realize it. Kaelric pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her. Through the bond, she felt everything, his fear, his determination, his love for her so strong it made her chest ache. I need you to do something for me, he said quietly. What? If I don't make it tomorrow, if things go wrong... He stopped, his throat working. Don't watch. Don't stay there and see it happen. Just go. Promise me. Lianhua pulled back to look at him. You're asking me to run while you die. I'm asking you to survive. And I'm telling you the same thing I told you before. I'm not making a promise I won't keep. She cupped his face with her good hand. If you go down tomorrow, I'm not leaving. I'm not running. I'm staying right there until it's over, one way or another. Because that's what people do when they love each other. They don't abandon each other at the end. Kaelric closed his eyes, and she felt a tear slide down his cheek. I don't deserve you. Probably not. She smiled despite everything. But you're stuck with me anyway. He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of all the things they didn't have words for. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them were shaking. I'm going to win tomorrow, he said. I know. And then we're going to figure out how to actually be happy. No more grief, no more fear, just us. Sounds perfect. They stood there together on the walls, watching the stars come out, holding each other like the world might end tomorrow, which it might. But for now, they had this moment, and that was enough. Dawn came too fast. Lianhua stood in the courtyard, watching Kaelric prepare. He'd stripped down to just his pants, leaving his torso bare. The bandages were gone, the wounds from the battle still visible but healing. He looked strong, powerful, every inch the king he'd been born to be. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, feel the fear thrumming through the bond. Garen approached, his face grave. They've accepted the challenge. The Alpha will meet you in the clearing at midday. Kaelric nodded. Anyone else coming? Just the Alpha, same as we agreed. Garen hesitated. There's something else. The messenger said, he said the Alpha has a message for you. What message? That it's been waiting for this. That it knew you'd eventually remember what it means to fight for something. Kaelric's expression went dark. What the hell does that mean? I don't know, but I don't like it. Neither did Lianhua. Something about this felt wrong, like they were missing a piece of the puzzle, but it was too late to back out now. The morning passed in a blur. Kaelric spent most of it in the training yard, running drills, keeping his body loose and his mind sharp. Lianhua watched from the sidelines, her stomach in knots, the bond pulled so tight between them it almost hurt. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, Kaelric stopped and turned to her. It's time, he said. They walked to the clearing together, surrounded by a small group of guards. The whole keep had turned out to watch, lining the walls, filling the courtyard, their faces tight with fear and hope. The clearing was empty when they arrived, just snow and bare trees and the cold wind cutting through everything. Then, from the forest on the far side, the bone-white Alpha emerged. It was even bigger than Lianhua remembered. Massive, ancient, its white fur almost glowing in the midday sun. Those red eyes fixed on Kaelric, and the intelligence in them was almost human. Kaelric stepped forward, and the guards fell back, leaving him alone in the center of the clearing. I am Kaelric, King of Shadowpine, he called out, his voice carrying across the snow. And I challenge you under the old laws, single combat, winner takes all. The Alpha's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile. Then it shifted. The transformation was unlike anything Lianhua had ever seen. The wolf form dissolved, bones cracking and reshaping, until a man stood in its place. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with white hair that fell to his shoulders, and scars crisscrossing his chest and arms. But it was his eyes that made Lianhua's blood run cold, the same burning red, filled with an intelligence that was terrifying. "I accept," the man said, his voice rough and deep. "But I want you to know something first, young king." Kaelric tensed. "What?" "I knew Alara." The words hit like a physical blow. Kaelric went absolutely still, and through the bond, Lianhua felt his shock, his confusion, his rage. "What?" he breathed. "Your first mate. I knew her, trained her actually, before she came to Shadowpine." The white-haired man tilted his head. "Did she never tell you that she was raised in the Eastern Coalition, that she left us to be with you?" Kaelric's hands clenched into fists. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask yourself why she never spoke of her past, why she had no family, no history, before she arrived at your gates." The man smiled, cold and cruel. "She betrayed us to be with you. And when she died, it was the best thing that could have happened, a traitor's death for a traitor." "Shut up." Kaelric's voice was low, dangerous. "The truth hurts, doesn't it? All these years you've been mourning her, punishing yourself for her death. But she was never worth it. She was weak, a deserter. And you—" The man's eyes gleamed. "You're just like her. Too soft, too willing to let love make you weak." "I said shut up!" Kaelric shifted mid-shout, his human form dissolving into the massive silver wolf Lianhua had seen before. The white-haired man shifted too, becoming the bone-white alpha again, and they collided in the center of the clearing with a force that shook the ground. The fight was brutal. They moved like lightning, all teeth and claws and raw power. Blood sprayed across the snow, red against white, and Lianhua couldn't tell whose it was. Through the bond, she felt every hit Kaelric took, every moment of pain, and it was all she could do not to run out there and throw herself into the fight. But she'd promised. She'd promised to let him do this, to trust that he was strong enough. The alpha was bigger, stronger, more experienced. But Kaelric was faster, angrier, fueled by 3 years of grief and guilt and rage, finally finding an outlet. They fought for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. And slowly, impossibly, Kaelric started to gain the upper hand. He caught the alpha's throat in his jaws and dragged it down, pinning it to the ground. The alpha thrashed, trying to break free, but Kaelric held on, his teeth sinking deeper. The clearing went silent. Then the alpha shifted back to human form, his body going limp in surrender. "Yield," the man gasped, blood bubbling from his lips. "I yield." Kaelric held on for a moment longer. Then, slowly, he released his grip and shifted back to human form. He stood over the fallen man, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his mouth and hands. "It's over," he said quietly. "By the old laws, you're bound to leave Shadowpine territory and never return. Your pack answers to me now." The white-haired man laughed, a wet, painful sound. "You think this is over? You think winning one fight changes anything?" "The laws? The laws only work if both sides honor them." The man coughed, more blood staining the snow. "I lied, young king. I never intended to honor this. My pack is already moving on your keep. They've been waiting for my signal. And now—" He smiled, his teeth red. "Now they know you're away from your people, distracted, weak." Horror crashed through Lianhua, and she turned to see smoke rising from the direction of the keep. "No," Kaelric breathed. Then he was running, shifting mid-stride, and Lianhua ran after him, her injuries forgotten, her whole world narrowing to a single thought. "Get there in time. Please, let us get there in time." They burst through the tree line to find the keep under siege again. Rogues poured through the gates, more than before, overwhelming the defenders. Civilians screamed, running for the inner keep, and guards fought desperately to hold the line. Kaelric didn't slow down. He hit the first wave of rogues like a battering ram, tearing through them with a fury that was terrifying to watch. And around him, the Shadowpine fighters rallied, finding their second wind. Lianhua grabbed a fallen sword and threw herself into the fight. This time was different. This time she wasn't afraid. She moved with purpose, with precision, cutting down any rogue that got too close. Her arms screamed in protest. Her side burned with every movement, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Because Calric was right there beside her, fighting like a man possessed, and the bond between them blazed so bright it felt like it could burn the whole world down. They fought side by side, covering each other's backs, moving like they'd been doing this together for years instead of days. And slowly, impossibly, the tide started to turn. The Shadowpine fighters found their courage. The civilians who could fight grabbed weapons and joined in. And the rogues, leaderless and disorganized without their alpha, started to fall back. Then Lianhua heard it, a howl from the forest, long and mournful. The rogues stopped fighting and turned toward the sound. Then, as one, they broke and ran, fleeing back into the trees like ghosts disappearing into mist. The courtyard fell silent except for the sound of ragged breathing and the crackle of dying fires. Calric shifted back to human form, swaying on his feet, covered in blood and bruises. Lianhua dropped her sword and ran to him, catching him before he could fall. "Is it over?" she asked. "I think so." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I think they're really gone this time." And through the bond she felt it, relief so intense it made her knees weak. They'd won. The next few days were a blur of recovery and rebuilding. The casualties were high, another 38 dead, dozens more wounded. But they'd held. They'd survived. And when scouts went to check the rogue camp the next day, they found it abandoned. The Eastern Coalition had lost, and their remaining forces had scattered to the winds. The white-haired Alpha had died from his injuries, his body left in the clearing as a warning to anyone else who might think of attacking Shadowpine. Calric ordered it burned, and nobody objected. As for the keep itself, the damage was extensive but not irreparable. The eastern wall needed complete reconstruction. The supply stores were depleted. The Great Hall was a mess of scorched stone and broken furniture. But they were alive. And that was what mattered. Lianhua spent most of her time in the infirmary, working alongside Marin to treat the wounded. Her own injuries were healing slowly. The stitches in her side held this time, and the bite on her arm was beginning to scab over. Calric threw himself into the work of rebuilding, organizing repair crews, redistributing supplies, writing to the southern packs to request aid. He barely slept, barely ate, pushing himself to exhaustion every day. On the 5th night after the battle, Lianhua found him alone in the war room again, staring at a letter he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. "Come to bed," she said from the doorway. He looked up, startled. "I need to finish this. It can wait until morning." She crossed the room and took the quill from his hand. "You're going to work yourself to death, and then what was the point of surviving?" Calric let out a long breath and rubbed his face. "There's so much to do, so much to fix." "And it'll still be there tomorrow." Lianhua pulled him to his feet. "Right now you need rest. We both do." He didn't argue. He just let her lead him out of the war room, through the quiet halls, up to the royal chambers he hadn't used in 3 years. The room was cold, dusty, filled with ghosts. But Lianhua built a fire in the hearth, while Calric stood in the center of the room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. "I haven't been in here since she died," he said quietly. "I know. Everything's the same, like she just stepped out and might come back any minute." He touched the edge of the bed, his fingers trembling. "I don't know if I can. Then we'll make it different." Lianhua moved to stand beside him. "We'll change things. Move furniture, get new blankets. Whatever you need to make this feel like ours instead of hers." Calric looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You'd do that?" "Of course." She took his hand. "This is our life now, Calric. Not your old life with her, not my old life before I came here. Ours. And that means we get to decide what it looks like." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. Through the bond she felt everything, his grief, his relief, his overwhelming love for her. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "How to be happy after everything." "Neither do I, but we'll figure it out together." She pulled back to look at him. "One day at a time, one choice at a time. And we start by getting some sleep." He smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. "Okay." They changed the room that night, working together in the firelight. They moved the bed to a different wall, packed away the things that belonged to Alara, brought in new blankets from storage. It wasn't perfect, but it was different, a fresh start. When they finally lay down together, exhausted and aching, Lianhua curled into Kaelric's side and felt the bond settle into something peaceful. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for challenging me, for refusing to let me hide." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "For choosing me back." Lianhua's throat tightened. Always. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in 3 years, Kaelric slept through the night without nightmares. 3 months later, Shadowpine Keep was transformed. The walls had been rebuilt, stronger than before. The supply stores were full again, thanks to aid from the southern packs. The infirmary had been expanded, and Marin had trained a whole new group of healers to help manage the workload. And the people had changed most of all. There was a lightness to the keep now, a sense of hope that had been missing for years. People smiled more, laughed more. The Great Hall was alive with music and conversation in the evenings, and children played in the courtyard without fear. And at the center of it all were Kaelric and Lianhua. They ruled together now, officially bonded in a ceremony that brought packs from across the north to witness. Lianhua had been terrified at first. She was still an outsider, still the foreign healer who'd stumbled into something bigger than herself. But the people of Shadowpine had accepted her, not because she was Kaelric's mate, but because she'd fought beside them, bled beside them, refused to give up when things looked darkest. She'd earned her place, and she wore it well. On a warm spring morning, Lianhua stood on the eastern wall, looking out at the forest. The snow had melted, revealing new growth underneath. Green shoots pushing through the earth, flowers beginning to bloom. Life, returning after a long winter. "There you are." She turned to see Kaelric approaching, a small wrapped package in his hands. "What's that?" she asked. "Your wedding gift. I know I'm late. We've been bonded for 2 months now. But I wanted to get it right." He handed it to her, looking almost nervous. Lianhua unwrapped it carefully and found a small wooden box inside. When she opened it, her breath caught. Nestled in silk was a pendant, a silver wolf and a crane intertwined, their forms flowing together in a perfect circle. It was beautiful, delicate, and clearly made by a master craftsman. "The wolf is me," Kaelric said quietly, "and the crane is you. 2 different creatures from 2 different worlds, finding a way to fit together." He took the pendant and fastened it around her neck. "I wanted you to have something that reminds you that you belong here, that this is your home now." Lianhua's eyes burned with tears. She touched the pendant, feeling the cool metal against her skin. "It's perfect." "Yeah? Yeah." She turned and kissed him, soft and sweet. "Thank you." They stood there together on the walls, looking out at their kingdom, and Lianhua felt the bond hum between them, steady, strong, unbreakable. "Do you ever regret it?" Kaelric asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Staying, fighting, choosing this life instead of leaving when you had the chance." Lianhua thought about it, about the girl she'd been when she first arrived at Shadowpine, angry, lost, dragged from her home and thrown into a world she didn't understand, about everything she'd survived, everything she'd fought for. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret it, not for a second. Even with everything that happened? Especially because of everything that happened." She turned to face him fully. "You asked me once what I saw when I looked at you, and I told you I saw a coward. But you know what I see now?" "What?" "A man who learned that the bravest thing you can do isn't dying for someone, it's choosing to live for them." She cupped his face, her thumb brushing across his cheekbone. "You chose me, Kaelric, not out of duty, not because of fate, but because you decided I was worth the risk. And that's the most courageous thing anyone's ever done for me." Kaelric's eyes went bright, and he pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he said. "I love you too." And as they stood there on the walls of Shadowpine Keep, the spring sun warming their faces, Lianhua knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Not because a bond had chosen them for each other, not because fate had decided they were meant to be, but because they'd fought for it, bled for it, chose it every single day, even when it was hard, even when it was terrifying. Years later, when people told the story of Shadowpine's darkest winter and the foreign healer who helped save it, they would talk about the battles, the sacrifice, the impossible odds. But they would also talk about the love story at the center of it all, about a grieving king who'd forgotten how to live and a stubborn woman who refused to let him die. About two people from different worlds who found each other in the darkness and chose to build something beautiful together. They would talk about courage, not the kind that came from fighting enemies or winning wars, but the kind that came from opening your heart when you were terrified of losing it, from choosing love when it felt like the most dangerous thing you could do. And they would remember that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with claws and teeth. Sometimes they're fought with the simple, stubborn choice to keep loving even when everything tells you to stop. Kael'ric had made that choice. Lyanna had made that choice. And in the end, it had saved them both.